Hello and welcome to the Uneducated PT Podcast with me, your host, Carl O'Rourke. The goal of this podcast is to bring on interesting and knowledgeable people from all walks of life, learn a little something from each conversation, and for you, the listener, to learn something from each episode. So don't forget to subscribe to the channel, press the box below, show some support, and I'll see you on the next episode. Cady, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
First and foremost, can you just tell the listeners a little bit about what you do?
Yeah, so I'm a psychotherapist. Basically, what that means is I work with couples, individuals in therapy to work on numerous different things. It could be any kind of symptom that's coming up for someone in kind of the mental health area. So you wouldn't know what's walking through your door. And it could be short therapy, it could be long-term therapy, just depending on the client, basically. So. And
what inspired you to pursue this as a career path?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of, they call it the wounded healer role. So I think most therapists have been on their own journey in terms of something that's happened to them that they've kind of needed to go off and find their own inner peace, I suppose, with their own mental health, and then they go off and say, oh, actually, I want to go and train in it now. Now, the only thing with me is that's a bit different. When you do your training, you have to do personal therapy.
Okay.
It's part of the course, and you have to do 120 hours of one-to-one therapy. And the first time I actually went to a therapist was when I started my degree, which is a bit more unique. But I think it was maybe my way of doing that journey for myself, but also then being able to support the people in it. Because, you know, you have to work through everything yourself so that you can be there for someone, because you can't get triggered with someone else's stuff. I can't start crying halfway through a session being like, let me tell you about my situation. So that kind of started me on that journey in my late 20s. And I've never looked back, you know, I absolutely love it.
I was just thinking there, that'd be hilarious that the therapist who just doesn't stop talking about themselves during someone else's therapy session.
Do you know what? Like, therapy actually isn't regulated at the moment, so it's still an unregulated thing.
It's like the fitness industry, you can get anyone kind of saying that. So
Cora are trying to come in and change that, obviously. But yeah, so there are ways of a person, if they're reaching out for therapy, to know that their therapist has a certain qualification behind them. That's kind of, we call them accrediting bodies. So everyone that is qualified to a standard would attach themselves to something like that. But yeah, you could get a therapist, because I've heard some stories.
I would imagine,
they're not ideal, like therapists falling asleep or therapists, divulging probably a little bit too much about their personal life. That's not so helpful.
So how did you end up in Bray, of all places?
Bray, of all places. Well, I've been in Ireland. Obviously, I'm not from Ireland. So I've been in Ireland.
Where are you from for the people listening?
So I'm from Worcester, originally in the UK. So Worcestershire sauce is always where everyone knows it from, or they can't pronounce it, either way. I've been in Ireland for about 11 years now. And do you know what? It was just such a pull to Bray. I couldn't tell you what it was about it. It's just a really special place. I know that sounds really stupid, and I'm not hugely spiritual or anything, so I wouldn't be really someone that's like all the energy or anything like that. But, you know, I have Mind, which is in Bray, the therapy centre, and when I saw that building, I just knew. I just knew that was the space. And anyone that comes in, they always just say, oh, this feels really right. And yeah, I can't really explain that because that's, you know, on a different level. But
how long has Mind been up and running? And tell people a little bit about that.
Yeah, so we've been running now for 18 months. Will be 2 years in November. So my whole experience, and I'm going to overgeneralize here, of being in therapy centres, is they're kind of like down alleyways or above buildings, tucked away. They're a little bit run down. There's this kind of like hiddenness about them, which I think just kind of feeds into shame. And that's not something that I wanted. And then when I was working with clients, one thing that kept coming in was this part of, I want somewhere to go that I can work on the physical side of me as well. So whether that's like yoga, Pilates, meditation, mindfulness, which is an add-on to therapy, but very different. And I didn't know where to send people, because you want to be able to trust people that you're, you know, if someone's in a crisis, you don't want to be sending them someone you don't know.
Or 5 different people.
Exactly. So I wanted to create a place that first of all, was seen, and secondly, had everything there. So, you know, we have therapists, but we also have coaches, and then we also have the body side of it, even to mum and baby, because, you know, that's a really tough time for a lot of people. So we have, you know, whether it's the baby massage or the yoga prenatal, or then we have workshops that go on as well. So these workshops can kind of pop up. We had like a matrescence one the other day, which is, for anyone that doesn't know, that kind of after piece, after you've given birth, you know, the whole journey of becoming a mother. And then we have workshops on completely different things. It could be something to do with just relaxation. I do a few myself as well. So it could be something to do with self-talk, you know, those type of topics. Yeah.
Just on the actual build, and that's a really good point, that like that's something that I've noticed, is that most of them kind of facilities are kind of tucked away. Do you think that's subconsciously, is that a subconscious thing that people do when they're creating them sorts of businesses? Or
I mean, I could take a logical route and say probably as a space above shops is probably ideal to rent. Do you know what I mean? Just to say like, oh, that we can use that space. That, you know, as a therapy centre, you don't need a retail because you don't need a front. You know, it's not necessarily something you would be looking for.
It's cost efficient.
So there is that aspect of it. But also, when the therapy centres do exist, you know, there's these like tiny plaques on the side that's like Buzz for Therapy Centre. You know, why not put it across the whole window?
Yeah, and that's a really good point as well, because if someone feels like they should be expected to feel ashamed or judged going into therapy and they have something to hide, and you're kind of encouraging that by making it so out of the way. Yeah,
and look, it's a hard one to navigate because there is still stigma there. You know, when I talk about our mission statement, it is to remove stigma to go into therapy. You know, making it accessible for all so everyone can kind of come together in that. And that's why I wanted that holistic, and I use that word in a wholeness perspective of supporting people, community and everything else in between. But I think we're the people that can start changing that narrative in terms of you should go to therapy. Everyone should go to therapy. You know, in like France, it's like, what, you don't have a therapist? You know, who's your psychoanalysis? Like, what? That's madness. Like in the States, they're so like, you know, oh, I'm just going to go to the gym, then I've got my therapy, and then I'll meet you after for a drink. You know, it's just such a difference.
Why do you think it's so... why do you think it's so forward thinking in places like France and the States, and not yet here in Ireland and maybe the UK?
Maybe from a historical perspective, I think there's a few things. Religion, maybe. You know, we have to also acknowledge that religion was our therapy for a really long time, and it still is as well. There's still a place for that. You know,
but just less people are going to church, and less people are
and also. Like, so for example, I think it's in Germany, you know, a lot of priests are trained as therapists. Whereas, you know, priests aren't trained as therapists here. They obviously have empathy, compassion and everything that's needed. But from an actual research, you know, tools, techniques perspective, they don't have that. So they can only take someone so far. But look, you know, I think faith is a great thing as well. I think we'll umbrella it as spirituality in terms of everyone has their kind of spirituality, whatever it is. I'm always careful with that because I think blind faith's great. I don't have it, but I'd love it. So I think that's a bit of it. I think there is still shame around it. And what I have noticed, which I think is lovely, older people are starting to reach out for therapy. So there's definitely a shift there. And
because they would be the last
ones, and men. So that's another shift. So we do see a lot more men coming to therapy.
Do you have? Is there? Would you have percentages? Would it still be like more than 60-70% female or?
Yeah, I'd say 60. Honestly, it's really shifting on the male-female front. And then I think what's also interesting is people training as therapists. It was predominantly a women's field, which is really ironic because when you go to study, you know, you start with Freud, who's a man, and then most of the psychotherapists and analysts that come past him are also men.
Yeah, Jung,
and then,
Freud.
Exactly. So then I don't know where the disconnect was that suddenly women, obviously naturally women have this kind of mothering side to them. So there isn't that part.
Do you think that's been a huge problem for men's mental health? This is something obviously I wanted to touch on the men's mental health, but I might as well touch on it now. Do you think that it's an issue? I wouldn't say an issue, but do you think that it's needed to have more men therapists to speak to men because it might be a little bit easier, or they're able to? I want to choose my words there because they just, it makes it maybe easier just to have them conversations sometimes.
I would say that when you initially reach out to look for a therapist, so in mind, what would happen is you can go on and look at someone's profile. It's quite tricky. You're looking at a picture and you're looking at a few words on a page and you're trying to connect with this person. You know, is this person for me? So I tend to try and do a matching service. So I try and find out what they want to work on. What's going on for them? Who's this person? And then I can kind of know a therapist that I might think would work for them. But I always say, first session, you are there as a client, a paying client, bear in mind. This is a service you're paying for. That might not be your person. And that's absolutely fine. Some people will come, a female might come and say, I only want to work with a female. A male might come, I only want to work with a female. Or it might be vice versa. It really just depends on what I think is going on for the person, on their experience. You know, maybe if you come from a household where there's a lot of male violence, you might not want to go to a male therapist.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That could be something that's quite alarming for you. So we have to look at it from that perspective. But then also, I think the narrative needs to change for men going to therapy. There's something around, women tend to be able to say, I need support, I'm going to go and reach out for it. Men tend to have more of a, my issues aren't bad enough.
I'll wait till it's extreme before.
Or I'll get by, or it's just a blip, or, and again, something that I'm always preaching is like, it's not about crisis intervention all the time. It's about maintenance. The best time to go to therapy is when you're not in a crisis.
It's the same with the gym. It's better to go to the gym when you are in shape and stay in shape than to wait till you're completely out of shape and then have to go and everything's 10 times more difficult.
Exactly, because then you're spending your whole time, doing, maybe it's an injury or weight gain, whatever it is, trying to bring you back to kind of a state where then you can start that journey. And it's the same with your mental health. It's like, right, get out of the crisis. And then when you're out of the crisis, it's like, okay, now how can we give you the tools so that if a crisis comes up in the future, you can get through it?
Do you think they should introduce it at a school level?
I think there should be something in the curriculum in terms of looking at mental health, and it's a little bit about, if someone goes to therapy and you look up to them, maybe you would also feel that you can do that. I definitely have a lot of parents that will reach out and say, oh, my child is going through something, I really want them to get support. And maybe under the age of 14, that's something that a parent can kind of sway. But realistically, 14 to 18, that child has quite a lot of autonomy over themselves. So if they don't want to go, they don't want to go. It has to be their choice in the matter. But if they aren't given any role model that is, showing that.
And if it is their choice, they're going to be more open-minded once they're there.
Completely. I think there's a good amount of sports professionals that have kind of switched into becoming psychotherapists, and those are the people that when they talk, you can see them, and the men in that are normally working with 12 to 18-year-olds, because it is that place where they can reach them. Oh, I'm a professional sports person. This happened to me. I didn't cope. I went to therapy. I'm now okay. I'm also now a psychotherapist. Would you like to come to me? When we're wanting to go to therapy, we're looking for safety. So we're looking for, people might choose someone that looks a bit like them, or looks a bit like their mum, or there's a word they're looking for. We want familiarity because it's safe.
That makes sense. What are some of the challenges that you're facing right now in your career?
Oh, challenges in terms of
Maybe from a societal level, maybe from a business standpoint.
Okay, so business standpoint, I think mine's really grown organically, and I'm, really proud of that. We have a very close knit team, and something as a therapist, it can be a very lonely trade.
Yeah.
As I said, you're not going to start opening up to your client, are you, about like what's going on for you?
Yeah.
So you might be talking all the time with someone all the time.
Well, this was going to be one of my questions down the line, that how do therapists essentially, because I would presume that they take a lot of their work home with them.
Yeah, which we're taught to not do that. And also we have supervision. So you have to go to supervision.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
Yeah, so it's part of being a therapist. And a lot of therapists would be in personal therapy as well. So you kind of have this mixture. So personal therapy is for your personal stuff, obviously.
Yeah.
So for example, say I go in with a client brings something that really triggers something in me that's personal. I take that to personal supervision, personal therapy to work through. Supervision is more, I don't know, I have a client with complex PTSD, so I'm thinking about, this is maybe where I'm going to take it, or that's where I'm going to take it, and we kind of hash that out. You're not giving details in terms of the person or anything like that, and that's always in your contract as well, so people are aware of that, obviously, when they're starting. But that's what we call safeguarding. We have to have safeguarding in place. Like, you're working with people's mental health at the end of the day. You need safety. It's number one within the room.
Yeah, I would imagine taking on all them problems all day, every day is going to build up if you have nowhere to release that. Yeah,
and I think you have to switch that narrative a little bit for yourself as well. We call it compassion fatigue.
Okay.
Compassion fatigue, and not just therapists, it's very much in the care industry, is something when you basically start to take on the trauma of someone else. So in our profession, we're taught a lot about this kind of stuff. But say someone that works in a nursing home, or maybe a school system when you're dealing with special needs, that is so full on all the time. The compassion fatigue is when you're don't stop thinking about it. It's in your dreams. You're exhausted. You can't switch off. You're getting burnout. Yeah. This is when it's dangerous. Yeah. And you can't be good for that person. No. And so burnout is high within therapists. And so, we talk about your client caseload. You're not going to have 15 people that are in complex cases. You kind of need to have a bit of a sway of different things that are going on so you can manage all of that. And this is something that's taught. It needs to be taught more. And trauma is something that, for some strange reason, isn't hugely in the curriculum sometimes. But a lot of therapists will go off and do their own training in it, because you can do diplomas or whatever.
I was going to go into different kind of topics and stuff like that. So trauma-informed therapy is something that you've studied recently. Yeah. And that's something that's not studied widely with therapists, is it?
Yeah, so it's not in the curriculum. So we have core training. Yeah. So your core training will be 4 years part-time, maybe 3 years full-time. That's your degree. Or masters if you have a degree before, however you go about it. And most people train as integrative. What that means is you look at all modalities. So I did integrative training, so I will be CBT, humanistic, psychoanalysis, psychodynamic, and you kind of look at a few different ones. There's narrative therapy. There's about 450 therapies out there, by the way. Someone's always popping up a new therapy. But those are the greats that you talk about, Carl Jung, Freud, they're person-centered.
They come down on them topics. Yeah.
Rogerian way, that's kind of a core kind of place that everyone goes to, because person-centered is about giving empathy. And they have the core conditions, and it's you can't really be a therapist if you're not giving those, so you have to have that. Then when people do that, they kind of go off into the therapy world and they start working with clients, and a lot of the time what happens is you kind of start to like a topic. And then people go and specialise in that. So they go off and either do kind of diplomas or whatever it is. So trauma is something that is, I suppose, something that we're talking about. It's a bit of a buzzy word, we'll call it.
Can you explain, if that's possible, what trauma is then?
Yeah, okay, so you have two types of trauma. You have something that is like PTSD. So PTSD is, say you were in a car crash. It's a once-off trauma.
Yeah.
And from that, you have got PTSD. So you're scared of getting in a car, you're worried you're going to be in a car crash again. That's that type of trauma.
Yeah.
Trauma can be, it's always something that's done to you. You know, so people are in war zones, obviously, at the moment. That's, you know, a trauma. And then we have developmental trauma. So developmental trauma would be generally within the family. So we're looking at abuse, neglect. And that's, you know, when our brains are actually developing.
So does this much generally happen in childhood?
Yeah,
it always happens in childhood.
Yeah, developmental does, because our brains are developing. So our brains generally are developing up until 20s. They kind of say, you know, at 18 we're an adult, but realistically it's about 23.
That explains a lot for me.
And the impacts then on that. And now we can kind of class that as complex PTSD. Generally is more of a developmental trauma, opposed to a one-off event.
So would people who have the developmental trauma, would a lot of time would they not realise that they have that trauma?
Of course they wouldn't know.
Okay.
They just know it's kind of hard to survive in life. Yeah, they're kind of up it all the time, up against it. It would kind of be that feeling.
So is that what a lot of kind of trauma-informed therapy is also helping them to figure out what that trauma is? Yeah,
and it's about safety again. So trauma-informed therapy is about also working with the central nervous system, because that's where trauma is stored. So we call it the window of tolerance. So imagine you've got a window and we're all skating along life in the middle, and we go up and down. So we go up into hyperarousal, which is your kind of anxiety, heart racing, a bit of adrenaline's going, cortisol, everything else. And then you come back down again. And then you're in your kind of middle ground. Then you can go down into hypo, which is more of your depressive states. You're feeling low, can't get out of bed, that kind of thing. Now those are on the kind of ends of the spectrum. So we kind of dip and dive all the time throughout life. But someone that maybe has been in trauma for a while would maybe be one side or the other side. So their ability to be in the window is harder. And then that's when we talk about resilience. You know, resilience is the fact of the ability to get back to the middle. So that's our nervous system, and we act off each other's nervous systems. So that's part of therapy as well. It's about you giving someone a place to regulate with you, co-regulation.
So how do you help someone to create that resilience?
Well, first of all, you're looking at a narrative. So, you know, there's the old school way of looking at trauma was we're going to relive it all.
Okay.
So we go into all of your past and look at it all. And for some people, that's exactly what they want to do. You know, they want the nitty gritty of everything that went on to really understand it, feel it, be with it again, whatever that might be. Newer research says we don't actually have to do that. It can just be as much as knowing it happened, feeling that it happened. We don't necessarily need to talk about it. So it might be something about, you know, talking in the present about what's been impacted, knowing the past, but we don't necessarily need to go into the past. And so by then just connecting, awareness is the biggest piece. Once we have awareness, we have a choice, you know, and with a choice, we can start to change.
So that's what about, let's say then, okay, so what about the first trauma, the one where it's actually a distinct accident that happens? Let's use the car crash example again, and then they're afraid to get back in a car, and we know that this is impacting their overall quality of life. How do you go about helping that person to get over that trauma?
So actually CBT can be very good in those kind of places, because CBT is shifting the narrative. So it's looking at the fact of, okay, if I step into this car, what is actually the facts on me being in another car crash? You know, we're looking at kind of facts opposed to irrational beliefs, which is kind of where you can be. Another thing is, as I said, there are lots of therapies out there. So one is EMDR, which is an eye movement, rapid movement. And basically what that does is, you know, when we go into talking about a trauma, our bodies can't decipher the difference between the trauma and talking about it and it's actually happening.
So even though you might have been in one car crash, you could relive it every day if you're talking about it every day.
And it feels just as real.
Yeah, your body can't distinguish the difference.
The brain sends exactly the same signals to say, this is going on. So can you imagine on a daily basis that anxiety, or however it's manifesting in your body, whereas EMDR as a therapy can basically, it kind of short circuits that part for you to be able to go into the narrative without reliving it, kind of heal it and then come back out almost.
Do you have clients who, okay, you've created awareness around, going back to the second trauma, that you've created awareness around what it was, but then they still can't move forward?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you have really long-term clients.
Yeah.
You're talking years.
Yeah.
You know, and that's just what it is, and that's okay. You call it rupture and repair.
Okay.
You know, you're looking at the rupture and we're repairing it. Rupture, repair. And
why is it that some people are more resilient to, they understand it, they move on, versus other people stay submerged in it to a degree?
This is a bit of a nature-nurture debate.
Okay.
You know,
Yeah.
but if you want to look at both of those sides, there's a psychotherapist, Philippa Perry. So I can't say this is my theory, but you know, she puts it very well. Some people are born dandelions. They can grow anywhere. They don't need any particular water, sun to thrive.
Yeah.
A lot of stuff can be hit at them and they'll still kind of be going. And some people are born orchids. And they just need a very specific climate to survive. And we have to acknowledge that we're different. You know, when someone says, oh, I've got 3 kids and they're all completely different, you know, sometimes we're just born different.
Yeah.
And then obviously the nurture piece comes in terms of what actually happened then in your childhood. You know, was there a bereavement? So it's not that it's the parents' fault, but maybe they were a bit more disconnected at some point because they lost a parent. You know, how could they not be disconnected? There's never any judgment there in the story finding, but it's important to acknowledge it so that you can then understand how you're operating.
That makes sense with the nature nurture, because then you can even have someone who's had the most horrific of circumstances when they're younger, but they seem to be doing really well in life, whereas someone else may have had more of a cushy life and can't move past a certain thing. And I know obviously you shouldn't compare one person's trauma to another person's trauma, but that would make sense in terms of the nature part.
Yeah. And then, I mean, in terms of resilience as well, if you've had nothing ever happen, you just don't have a capacity for it because you just wouldn't understand it.
You haven't used that muscle.
Yeah, exactly. And that's all to do with your nervous system. You know, your nervous system's just so used to this. Yeah. So anything that's going to come and attack it, it's just so dysregulating for the person. Whereas someone else has just really had that up and downs. They're like, oh no, I can bring it back. I'm able to do that.
They're like, I've had everything thrown at me at life. It means absolutely nothing. What's the link between substance abuse and trauma?
Ooh, okay, so trauma in terms of the feelings, it's such a overwhelming feeling. You know, when we talk about it in terms of, like, say, war veterans that are coming back from war and they're stuck in PTSD and they're just not getting any help whatsoever. Can you imagine waking up every single morning feeling, as I said, as if you're reliving the same experience as you were at war and those flashbacks that are happening? There's no safety for you whatsoever. So what do you want to do? You want to escape it. What's the best way to escape something? It's to numb it. How can we numb it? Substance. Whether it's drugs or alcohol, whether it's sex addiction. We're talking any addiction. Not
anything at all,
Anything that will literally take you out of that. Dissociate from the event. You know, it's just so overwhelming. Of course, you can understand why anyone would want to do that. And realistically, you know, a lot of people use alcohol in their teens to get through it. I am not advocating that whatsoever. But you can but you can understand why it happens because it's, you know, it's something that maybe they stumble upon. But then suddenly, oh my gosh, you know, I feel like maybe you're shy. Now I have some, you know,
Dutch courage.
Exactly. Or, you know, I'm really overwhelmed by something that's happening at home, but now I have a few beers and it disappears. and then it's kind of a cycle into it, because that becomes your crutch. We all have to have defenses to survive, by the way. If we don't have a defense mechanism, you won't survive life, because life is crap sometimes. But we can have healthy defense mechanisms and coping strategies. We'd never judge someone that does that, because actually you have to give them a bit of kudos as well, to say, you survived life. You've managed to find something that has created an ability to be in it. But now you're aware that it's becoming an issue. We can now change it.
Do you think that people can't overcome substance abuse unless they find that awareness of why they were actually using it in the first place?
Not necessarily. So again, substance abuse is some people can be predisposed.
Yeah.
And it's, again, a bit of a nature-nurture debate, because, say you're born with a genetic disposition to alcoholism, and then you grow up in a family where alcohol doesn't really exist. It won't really affect you. But if you grow up in a family where alcohol is used and you see someone using it to do exactly the same, then that becomes your way. Whereas also, if you are born with no genetic disposition, but you're seeing someone do it, we copy. Well, that looks good. That looks like it's numbing something. And this isn't a actual conscious decision, by the way. This is like us just knowing. A lot of the time we're disconnected from our bodies, so we're not actually realizing what's happening, but all we know is I feel better when I do that, and I don't feel like I'm in so much pain. That's kind of where suicide comes in a lot of the time, because suicide is the thing that takes the pain away. Well,
that's what I wanted. That was obviously one of the topics that I wanted to get in with you. So, applied suicide intervention skills training. What essentially is that? What does it look like? Yeah.
So, look, there's lots of actual training out there for anyone that kind of wants to do it, and I do think sometimes it could be really important for people to be able to do this.
Yeah.
But the training consists of being able to be aware of it, to see it in someone. And then if that person actually does come to you, being able to put in place a kind of way of them being safe. Again, it's all about safeguarding.
Yeah, a lot of things that you're saying, even in terms of the trauma, in terms of a suicide intervention, in terms of a word that you use a lot is safe.
Emotional safety. It's literally at the core of who we are. If you feel emotionally safe in yourself, you're going to be okay.
Yeah.
It's when you don't feel like you're safe. That's when and when we use the word safe, it's basically when you don't trust yourself.
Yeah.
If something's happened to you, say rape, you don't trust yourself, because a lot of the time people, our brains shut down in that situation because it's so overwhelming. So the narrative afterwards is, why didn't I stop it? Why didn't I say something? Why didn't I fight back? And that's when the shame gets in it. And then I can't trust myself. What was it me? Did I wear something? What did I ask for it? Did they not realize I didn't want it? This is the bit that it dysregulates you, so you don't feel safe in your own body. You don't trust yourself.
Yeah.
And that's scary. But you can bring it back. And you can always bring it back. But when you're looking at it from a suicide perspective, it generally is, there's actually kind of like almost this, light that you'll see in someone, because they're free when they've made that decision.
You said to be able to see it in someone, and also to know what to do. What are you looking out for?
So we look at this in two different perspectives. One of them is like just in general, like say if I saw it in a friend, and then we have it in the therapy room. If it's in the therapy room, when I do an intake with someone, now someone can always lie, but it's one of my questions: self-harm or suicide?
Okay.
I actually think if you weren't going to ask anyone anything in an intake, if you asked them that question, you would find out so much about someone. Sometimes it can be the first time that someone's even divulged that information to someone. Actually, I did try and take my life once.
What does it mean to distinguish them two things?
In the therapy, it gives you an insight into that person like that.
Yeah.
You know what you're working with. You know exactly where you are.
Yeah.
And we're talking active, or we're talking past.
Yeah. So would you say then that self-harm is a cry out for help? Or would you say
so self-harm? It's in my question with suicide. They're very different.
Yeah.
Self-harm generally is around feeling. So if you are going through something that's so painful that you're shutting down, you're going into dissociation, you're not feeling anything, you're numb, so numb. And a lot of people will describe the experience as that cut gives them a sense of relief. They can feel again. They can
feel something, yeah.
They're attaching themselves back to themselves. So that's generally where self-harm can kind of come. So it's the overwhelm and then it's the release. So again, it's about bringing people back into a space where they don't have to go into the overwhelm to have to get the release.
Yeah.
So, you talk around a lot of steps of when you feel like you're going to do it, we need to check in. What's happening for me right now? Why am I feeling that I want to do it? That kind of thing. And then with suicide, whether it's present or past, if it's past, it's about, okay, what happened in that person's life? Why didn't they? How did it look? What went on? If it's in the present, and I'm working with a client, we contract around safety. And what that looks like is, as long as we're in therapy together, you're not going to try and take your life. If for whatever reason something comes up that you feel that you're in that position, you're going to reach out to me and we're going to walk through. And that would be getting in touch with the next of kin. So this would be kind of your phases. So that would be putting them in a person of safety. So that's a next of kin. If they don't have a next of kin, it's your GP, your hospital. And then we're kind of going through the phases of, is medication needed? Maybe you'd up your therapy. So it's not unusual for people to go to therapy twice a week.
Yeah.
That's something that you would do on a period, and then you'd start to open it back up again. And take it from there. So,
and then what, the second question then, if you know that someone is suicidal, then let's say as a friend or as a family member, then it's essentially trying to get them into therapy as soon as possible.
Yeah.
Is there anything else?
So you actually, this might seem like it's kind of a bit of a directness, but you kind of have to be. So if someone said to me, I'm looking to die by suicide, I would have questions. And the questions would be along the lines of, how are you going to do it? When are you going to do it? Have you got what you need to do it? And I know that sounds terrifying. And you're thinking...
Like someone in the general public will probably just would never think of asking them questions.
Would never think of it, because almost you're thinking, am I showing them how to?
Am I helping this person?
Am I helping them? Yeah. But what it's telling me is how serious.
Yeah, where it is on the scale.
Where is it?
Yeah.
Because I've been thinking about it for 6 months. I've got the rope. It's going to be in this place. It's going to be tomorrow night, and I've written my letters.
Yeah.
Okay, we're in crisis. I'm not sure. I think if I was, it would be, maybe I'd take an overdose. Actually, no, maybe I would do it this way.
Yeah.
Okay, we're not quite...
But you can get them into therapy.
Yeah, exactly. We're somewhere, but we're not there. And so, as I said, that sounds terrifying. I get that. But that's part of the training. And those questions are actually very important.
What other common misconceptions about suicide intervention that you encounter?
In terms of from a therapeutic place, so as in if someone was in therapy and they kind of brought that knowledge to you, for the client, as in their misconception on it, maybe that it gets reported, maybe it's going to be told to their family. There can be a lot of shame around it, guilt. Maybe they don't want someone to know. It's a pure escapism from life. So there can be a lot of fear there as well.
Especially if it's, let's say, a 14-year-old girl or a 15-year-old boy who doesn't want their parents to know what they're intending to do. Yeah. So how do you approach that?
So in terms of that age bracket, I have to say, I think that education, again, is key. Now, I have to say, Pieta are very good at this. So they have different school systems in place where they go out to schools and they do information on it. So one of those is educating kids to know that this feeling that they're having can be a feeling
Yeah.
and how they can reach out to someone. Because a lot of the time it's really confusing, especially at that age. Imagine all your hormones anyway. It's the most confusing time, let alone, you know, something on top of it like that.
Yeah.
So they might not even realise what is going on in terms of,
Have you noticed the problems of that generation changing with social media?
So again, on my intake form, I now have, when I first qualified, I wouldn't have had this question, and now I have screen time. Can we talk about it? And when I'm talking about screen time,
Don't ask me about screen time.
no,
please.
but everyone says this. They say, "Oh, I'm trying to not be on it as much."
Yeah.
And I always say, I actually don't. I'm not looking for the fact that you're on it 10 hours a day.
Yeah.
I'm looking at your relationship with it.
Yeah.
So, you know, a lot of kids might be like, there's online bullying, or they're coming off saying, you know, so-and-so has this, I don't have this, I feel I'm not good enough.
Yeah.
I want to be thin, this person's thin.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm following this person and she has this. It's that piece. And that can be in adults as well, by the way. That's not just teenage kids, you know. Oh, why aren't I on that holiday that someone's on? You know, what have I done wrong? Or, oh, look at that person that's got engaged and I'm single. We're bombarded with a lot. And then on top of that, you have things like the news, which is a completely different side to it. When we talk about compassion fatigue, you know, if you're reading about the stuff that's going on all the time, there's a piece of you that says, like, I can't do anything about it. So now I feel guilty that I'm privileged almost. You know, it's such a spectrum of emotions that can be provoked by spending 10 minutes on a social media platform.
Yeah, you're not likely to, especially with the news, you're not likely to get onto the news and get something positive that's going to make you feel.
It never is. It's like, you know, it's always some kind of unfortunate story, which is how the news works. But it can really affect someone. Say if they're feeling not great.
Yeah.
You know.
What about in terms of, okay, we're looking at social media and comparing to other people and all this stuff, and then feeling negative about yourself. Have you worked in the past? Do you work with a lot of girls and boys who suffer with body image issues and relationship with foods and disordered eating and stuff like that?
Yeah, disordered eating is, you know, a big one.
Yeah.
Again, eating's generally about control. So there's something going on in someone's life that they can't control it, and then they find another way of controlling it. And also maybe you've seen this in terms of fitness as well. You know, one of the biggest ones that's coming through at the moment is in terms of men and having very fit physiques.
Yeah, muscle
dysmorphia.
Yeah, it's huge at the moment.
So, and also healthy eating's another one. It's the fact it's taken to an extreme.
Yeah, healthy eating.
Yeah. So we see it as such a positive, and we can say, oh my gosh, doesn't that
not healthy?
But it's not healthy because they can't actually eat something that's not in this very, very small category of food. That's disordered eating. You know. But why are you needing to control something? You know, a lot of fitness professionals will talk about this now in terms of, you know, I was this weight and I was this muscle mass and everything else, and now I'm this, but now I'm happier. Now I'm not feeling this. You know, there's obviously been a shift in terms of what's going on for them to be able to be on that journey to now not have to have that control. So again, it's all a coping mechanism. You know, we're actually so smart as people that we can find these ways, but they're just the dysfunctional ones that don't help us. And you have to tread slowly with that. You know, in therapy, 3 sessions aren't going to get you through disordered eating. And as I said, like, people go off and specialise. So you'd have people that specialise in disordered eating, so they'd really be able to tackle that.
But even for like someone who's never even thought of before to go into a therapy room and to understand that, okay, it's not really about the food, it's about me, and it's about control because I feel this way or I don't feel good enough or whatever it is.
I mean, I don't think that's, a lot of this stuff is subconscious. You know, people,
but like you said, the goal is awareness.
Oh, completely, because once you start to realise that impacted me, okay, but I'm surviving it, I'm okay, so how can I shift that I don't have to have such a tight control over it? You know, and when you talk about disordered eating, there's one way or the other way. You know, anorexia is generally when it's the tightening of it, so it's the restriction. So there's something going on there in terms of I need to restrict all of the goodness in my life because I can't take that nutrition. And then you have the other side where you're maybe with the bulimia.
Yeah.
So then that's the binging.
Yeah.
So binging is the numbness.
Yeah.
I'm going to eat so much until I literally feel sick so I can feel and I'm not numb anymore and now I'm guilty. So what am I going to do? I'm going to purge.
You also specialised or studied in couple counselling, is that correct?
Yeah. So I work with couples.
What are the most common challenges couples come to you with?
Oh, it can be everything and anything, if I'm perfectly honest. But at the core of it would be communication. Because infidelity, stresses from work that have impacted, the breakdown of a marriage, say a child's been born and that's, dysregulated the whole thing. Communication is normally lost. They're not communicating with what their needs are within it. And so they're almost operating in silos.
How do you help to improve that communication of two people who have lost it over the years without realising it?
Yeah, so when you're working with couples, it's different to working with individuals. So if you're working with an individual, the therapy is about the individual.
Yeah.
When you're working with a couple, the therapy is about the relationship.
Yeah.
So with
different dynamic.
Different dynamic completely. Yeah. So we're working on the relationship, what is going on in the relationship. So within that, it's about getting people's stories, but then understanding what their defenses are. So a lot of things that can happen is we're changing the way maybe someone is looking at something. So someone might do something along the lines of, you did this the other day and I'm so angry at you and you made me feel like this and this. It's very critical. What is the other person going to do? They're going to go
defensive.
Straight on the defense.
Yeah, because you're pointing at me.
You're pointing at me. You're saying you did this, you did that. I'm going to shut down. What happens then when someone shuts down? The other one's literally chasing them to try and get in some more, and that becomes more intense. So I'd be like, right, stop that straight away. Let's look at some healthy communication. So the other day when that happened, I felt, not you made me feel, I felt this was going on. We're taking the criticism away straight away. So the other person now has a chance to say, okay, I'm sorry you felt like that, but I didn't mean it that way. Opposed to you did that to me.
Yeah, you're not trying to win the arguments now.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. What if you had, let's say, a couple or someone who was someone was more hesitant to engage in couples therapy than the other partner? Yeah,
I mean, look, straight off the bat, I'd have to say, are you both here? Because if you're not both here to work, I can't work with you.
Well, presumably one has probably dragged the other there.
A lot of time one person reaches out for sure.
The woman probably.
And then the other one comes along.
Yeah.
But honestly, once you get people in the room, you can normally tell. Again, it's a little bit around, first of all, am I their therapist?
Yeah.
Because I work differently to someone else that's a couple therapist. We have to acknowledge that.
Yeah, does the dynamic of the relationship of the three work?
Yeah, I mean, maybe an older couple might feel uncomfortable with me.
Yeah.
Maybe they'd be like, oh, you don't have any life experience.
Does that happen?
It does sometimes, yeah. Sometimes people don't even think about it.
Yeah.
It just depends, on that dynamic. But I'd be very much, as I said, that first initial session, it would be, if I was noticing that, I'd be naming that straight away.
What strategies do you use to help couples rebuild trust after infidelity?
Yeah, so this is a huge one. So infidelity is, I suppose, first of all, how's it impacting the couple in terms of what is their actual want to move forward? Sometimes infidelity can happen and they want to rebuild. Sometimes one of them doesn't want to rebuild. So that's the first part. Infidelity is an interesting one. Generally it's happened because something within the dynamic is being unmet. And it blows up the relationship, and it can actually be really positive because it can allow you to repair that piece that was not working for so long if you choose to move forward. But you have to forgive in it, and there has to be the trust rebuilding. The person that's had the affair needs to understand they're going to have to reassure the other one. That's your role. to kind of take that forward a little bit. You know, take accountability. You know, if I'm not seeing accountability, I'm going to be, you know, calling that out straight away.
Well, presumably, if they're both in the room looking for therapy or couples counselling in regards to this, that's the first sign of that accountability.
Yeah, but it is. But you might have someone that's had the affair that's trying to repair, and the other person saying, no, I don't want to actually repair this.
That person's almost nearly forced in, but
exactly. So, you know, you have to really look at that dynamic.
Well, that will be, it's a lot more difficult then for that person who has been cheated on to...
There's a lot of hurt there, a lot of pain, And then we're always taking it back to family of origin. So what I mean by that is looking at your parents' relationship. Because, again...
Does that impact?
It's...
Yeah,
it's life. That's life. Okay, so you're born into the world, and then your parents bring you up, and this is your attachment style.
Yeah.
So your attachment style is from when you're very young.
Tell us a little bit about the attachment styles.
Okay, so attachment styles are you have avoidant, which is generally someone that shuts down. So when things get a bit too tough, they go into their own little corner, they go very quiet, they don't want to deal with it.
You're fighting with the wife and you walk out the house and go down to the pub.
Exactly, yeah, completely. Yeah. Avoid it at all costs.
Yeah.
Then you have your anxious.
Follows you to the pub.
Yes. And the problem is when you have couples that are avoidant and anxious, it's like Tom and Jerry. They're just following each other around, and we have to stop that because it's like, okay. And then you have secure, which I don't know. I'm not sure secure exists, if I'm honest. Apparently it does though. So those are kind of like your three. We also have disorganized.
Okay, what's that?
Disorganized is a mixture of anxious and avoidant.
Okay.
It's quite a hard one when someone has that attachment style. Again, it's no judgment. It's just about us like working with it.
Yeah.
Because you're a mixture of the two. So you can shut down, but then you can become quite needy. So for the other, it's like, I'm so confused. One second you want me, the other second you don't want me. Like, what's going on here? And they are created in childhood. From
what you see from your parents,
relationship that we have with our parents, with our primary caregiver. So we'll call them caregivers because people are brought up by all types of different people, and that's absolutely fine. And then that goes into adulthood. And then generally what happens is we search for someone that is a mirror of our experience. So you would never really find they were avoidant and avoidant together because like
yes, oh god.
Like they might have one date and they're never going to talk to each other ever again kind of thing. Anxious and anxious, they're generally like, you know, those like couples that go and get like married after 6 months and have a baby and like that's them. That's them because they're so in their own like.
But does that work long term?
It does work, for sure. Like everything works. It's you know, it's not saying that one thing doesn't work or whatever, but you will probably just come across little things, nuances that, you know, some people are just so used to over time that they don't even think about it. But maybe when you start to unravel it a bit, they'll be like, oh yeah, okay, that's something that maybe I should look at.
So would you say if someone was cheating, do you think that could come from childhood for numerous reasons? Even in terms of like avoidance, so like cheating, let's say it's like a new relationship, not like a relationship, a long-term relationship, like a new relationship, and then you're almost cheating to self-sabotage the relationship.
It possibly could be. Generally I'd say it's like an unmet need within the relationship. So maybe, I don't know, maybe sex is something that hasn't happened. Intimacy is an issue. So they go outside the relationship to find intimacy. You know, that's something that's quite common, opposed to having a conversation about the fact of why aren't we being intimate? What is going on? So it's easier almost to go outside because it doesn't have any consequences, even though it does, it kind of doesn't in a way.
So if you, let's say you have a couple in counselling and one is avoidant and one is anxious and you have created awareness you've created awareness in both of these people, that's their attachment style. What needs to happen then? Do they need to both become, what was the secure in order for the relationship to thrive?
No, not necessarily. In terms of like look, there's people out there that thrive completely and are anxious and avoidant. They just manage to kind of fumble through life and they're absolutely fine. I suppose it's couples that where they're up against something.
Yeah.
And generally that, again, happens when things happen in life.
Yeah.
You know, there's a bereavement and suddenly the relationship just can't thrive after it. Just can't seem to get back off. You know, you kind of hear these stories where it's like, you know, after my dad died, the relationship just never was the same. But why should that impact the relationship, you kind of say? Because there's nothing that's happened within the relationship, but maybe that person, you know, started to disconnect a bit. So then the other person, especially if they feel anxious, they're going to say, I'm not seen. You don't love me anymore. Oh, my co-worker started talking to me.
Now I have a bit of attention.
They're now giving me attention. Oh, I'm seen again. Oh, well, this feels nice. And then, over 6 months, this has developed into something else. Again, if you could have looked at it at the time, you know, infidelity gives you so much information in terms of the dysfunctionality of your relationship. But it would be a lot better if that didn't have to happen for you to understand it.
And could you reverse engineer that back to the communication in the first place?
Yeah. I mean, people are afraid to have that communication. Like, what about if I upset the person? What about if conflict happens? Maybe you come from a household that everyone has a smile on their face all the time. You don't want to create conflict. You know, it's scary to you. So you're going to avoid it.
You feel vulnerable.
Completely, yeah. And that sounds weird because you'd think you'd want to be vulnerable with your partner. But actually, that's the most important relationship. So it's actually easy to be vulnerable with a stranger sometimes than it is with the person that you care about, because you don't want to hurt them.
You could say that even in other aspects as well. Let's say someone's suffering with their mental health. It's probably easier to tell someone that they is a complete stranger than it is to tell their brother, their sister, their friend. Yeah,
completely. And I mean, that's therapy.
Yeah.
You know, Freud discussed it as like tabula rasa, which is like a blank slate. Like you're coming in and you're literally having a blank slate there. You know, the client doesn't really know anything about you. It's a bit of an odd setup when you actually like drill it down like that.
Yeah.
You know, they're trusting their whole story with someone they've never met. And so, you know, the first few sessions really is about relationship building.
And feeling safe to speak.
Which is relationship building. Because if it's a safe relationship,
it's not,
you're going to want to be able to...
2 more questions, all right? What do you believe... I'll forget that one. What advice would you give to someone considering a career in psychotherapy?
Do it. Someone that is...
What would you want to have known if, let's say, you were to do it again? What would you want to have known that you didn't know then?
Look at the courses. There's a lot of courses out there, and I think it's really important to find a very well accredited course that has a lot of support. There's a lot of courses that maybe sell one thing and give another thing. So I definitely say do your research, especially as Koru is coming in, which means you don't want to go and do a course that now you're not able to practice in because the regulatory body says you have to be at this level. So from a very, you know, side of it that says like just so you can have your qualification, I'd say do your research in that. What I would say is it's the toughest course you'll ever do in your life, and I'm not saying that to scare anyone, but they have to literally pull you down to pull you back up again. And I don't think anyone expects that.
Did you expect that?
No, I did not. You know, you're not going in, it's not like a business course where you can like just scrape through on writing a few essays and knowing your knowledge. You have skills training, you have group supervision, you have personal therapy, you start with clients in year 3. You know, there is so much of an emotional piece to it. And I would tell anyone to do it because honestly, it has made me the person I am today. And I mean that from a perspective of just having the confidence in life to be able to navigate it on a different level that I would never have had before. And so that's what the course gives you. Even if you never practiced, I would say most people would say, I loved it, don't regret it.
And then the last question, more from a client perspective, especially anyone who might be local in the town, if they wanted to reach out to get help, to inquire about therapy, where can they go? What way can they fill out an application form, or how does it work?
Within Mind specifically?
Within Mind, yeah.
Yeah, okay, so you can go onto the website. So there's a couple of different ways. As I said, you can either look at people's profiles and kind of try to connect in terms of who you think might work for you, and then there's a button there that you can book in, and it'll give you a form to fill out. It's a very simple form, just like details and a little bit of a message.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you can go onto the website, and there's actually just a generic form, which will come to myself, and I'll be able to then talk to the client and be able to match them with someone that I think will work well for them, based on a few different things like availability as well. Because you don't want to say, oh yeah, I can make therapy at 12 o'clock on Monday this week, but then the following 6 weeks I can't do that. Yeah. Then you're kind of setting yourself up
creating barriers
and setting yourself up for failure. Yeah. So these are actually really important. Thinking about, do you want a male or female? Yeah. And what's really important to you? What topic are you kind of looking to work on? It could be an array of things, but maybe there's something that's drawing you in to want to start therapy, and there generally is. So it's kind of, finding that connection, and then we'll get you set up probably within the week,
And would all the consultation forms or the consultation calls, or are they all in person, or can some of them be online, or?
No, so when you reach out in that way, literally that just comes through email. Some people only want to talk by email. Yeah. So I would always respond by email. Yeah. And then at the bottom say, if you'd prefer a phone call, let me know. Yeah. So that you have that option. Some people like to talk through WhatsApp. It really doesn't matter. Like, the number on the website is, WhatsApp is absolutely fine to reach out as well. Or a phone call. Some people don't want to email. They want a phone call. They want to talk to that person.
Depending on the generation.
It just really does. Exactly. So doing that. And then everyone that's in the centre is in private practice, which means that they are like their own therapist. Yeah. So they will have their own intake form. They will go through things. So just, for example, someone might have their health insurance that they want to use. Just always check. Yeah. Not all therapists are slightly different. So not all healthcare providers cover all therapists because they're all with these different accrediting bodies, which there's nothing wrong with that. But healthcare providers don't understand the nuance of therapy. So they just go, oh, I'll pick this accrediting body and that's the only one we're going to deal with. Yeah. So first session, or, these are kind of things to think about on top of maybe what you're looking for. And then you'd have your initial session with them. Now, low cost is different, which is obviously something that we discussed. Yeah. So anyone that's in maybe a position that they can't pay the full price, they would come into the low cost category, and within that they'd have to come and do an intake with myself, which is in person or online, depending again on the person's situation. Yeah. And we go through some kind of information in that, because it is just a slightly different way of working. Yeah. Well, listen, we'll have all the information on the show notes, and again, Cady, I can't thank you enough for your time. It's really been really valuable. No, thanks so much for having me. I've really enjoyed it. So. Thanks for watching. If you like that episode and you want to see more content like this, make sure you're subscribed, and I'll see you on the next one.